the ultimate guide to photographing the aurora and night sky. Welcome to our channel. Subscribe and watch until the end of this video. Night photography, how to photograph an aurora and some beauty of the sky. This video is made to give the minimal knowledge necessary to take nice shoots of the polar aurora. With the same information, you can do some interesting shoots of the night sky, moon, Venus, constellations, using to zoom some star clusters or the Orion's nebula and some more. There are many important arguments which are not covered by the video because not indispensables for our target. In theory, we can photograph an aurora with any device capable of taking pictures, from a simple smartphone to the latest and most powerful camera. Clearly, depending on what I use to photograph, I will have more or less successful results. For our explanation that follows, let's assume we have a DSLR camera and we could choose the lens we want to use, a 1635mm or 2470mm. In addition to the DSLR, we will need a tripod to mount it. It is not essential, but it is certainly very useful to have a remote shutter release to avoid introducing vibrations that would make the photo appear blurry or shaky. When photographing at night, we need to understand how to capture as much light as possible on the camera sensor. Below are the main variables involved and their influence on the photograph. For an aurora, the variables are aurora's extent. The aurora could be on a very small portion of the sky or could be across the whole sky. Depending on the lens mounted, we can capture a larger or smaller portion of the sky. Movement of the aurora. The aurora is a bit like smoke or fog that moves and constantly changes shape. Sometimes it moves quickly, sometimes so slowly that it appears stationary. It shifts, appears, or disappears. To capture sharp, non-blurry photos, it's important to be able to choose the right exposure time. Earth's rotation. This manifests as the apparent movement of stars, which in photography become small arcs or circles. It is important to check with a few test photos to determine the maximum exposure time so that stars remain as points and not streaks. Event intensity. If you want to photograph an aurora with a low KP factor, you'll need to set the camera to let in as much light as possible on the sensor. With photography parameters, we can decide how much light we need on the sensor to capture the photo we imagine. We have three main parameters. Lens opening. This indicates how much the diaphragm will open to take the photo. At night, this parameter should be set low to allow more light to reach the sensor. Aperture also affects depth of field, which isn't an issue at night because the sky appears to be at the same distance, unlike during the day when you must adjust based on various depths of field. For night shots, we start with the largest aperture possible, smallest f number. Shutter speed. This is the duration for which the lens stays open. If I'm photographing the sky and want pinpoint stars, depending on the lens used and the moon or light pollution, I would start with an exposure time of 5 to 10 seconds. ISO sensitivity. This parameter allows you to take photos with minimal light. The downside is that increasing the ISO also increases graininess in the photo. Modern cameras allow very high ISO, but for our settings I would suggest not to exceed 3200 or 6400. Depending on your camera, it would be difficult to reach higher ISO values without significantly losing quality. Now we have seen what can vary during an aurora, and we know what the three main parameters are that we use to adjust to get a photograph as we desire. We are now ready to take our first night photos. It will be important to do some tests, perhaps photographing the moon, a road with little traffic during the night, a monument in a park, etc. These tests will help us understand what we can do and how to adjust the parameters to succeed. Now we will see the sequence of operations needed to photograph the night sky. The best auroras are visible in winter and near the poles, so it will be cold or very cold. -20 or -30 degrees Celsius are not impossible temperatures, and for a nice shoot you stay long time with just small movement to release the shutter of your camera. Think of wearing warm layered clothing that allows you to stand still with your feet in the snow for hours. Don't forget gloves, which could be a lifesaver. Opt for gloves that allow you to use the touchscreens on phones and DSLRs, and warm overgloves to wear when you don't need tactile sensitivity. During the day, go and find a location with a valuable landscape for the photo, a lake or the sea in the foreground, a mountain, rock, person, bridge, or monument can add interest to the shot. If there are small or potentially dangerous paths, be sure to scout it and have the necessary equipment, light, crampons. To avoid any vibrations, always use a tripod for the camera. If there's wind, remove any straps from the camera and add weight to the tripod. Normally, there is a hook under the central column of the tripod where you can hang a weight to provide more stability. Use the remote shutter release. If you don't have a remote control available, you can use the camera's self-timer. This way, once you press the shutter button, there will be a few seconds delay before the photo is taken. Choose to save images in RAW format, not JPEG. RAW stores the data from the camera's sensor without any modification. This gives you more post-production possibilities. On the other hand, JPEG compresses the sensor data, losing some information and resulting in smaller file sizes. Frame the scene you want to photograph, remembering that normally for an aurora, which covers a wide area of the sky, a 16mm lens would be preferable to a 35mm or 50mm. The use of lens bigger than 50mm or even zoom is just in case you want to have a detail of aurora, maybe with a nice foreground. Set the camera to manual mode and let's start with following parameters. ISO 800, T equals 5 seconds, and the widest possible lens opening with the lenses we are using. Remember, wide lens opening equals smaller number. For example, f/2.8 is wider than f/5.6. With these parameters, focus the camera. There are several methods for focusing. The simplest and quickest is to find a light, or the moon, a few hundred meters away and let the camera focus automatically. Once focused, without moving the focus ring, switch to manual focus mode. For security, you can tape the focus ring to prevent it from rotating. You can also check the camera's focus indicator and remember where the infinity point is on the focus scale. Be careful, it's not at the end of the scale, but a few millimeters before it. Start by taking a test photo. The test photo will likely be either overexposed or underexposed, so we're ready to correct it. Typically won't change the focal length unless we want to adjust the framing. If the focal length changes, we'll need to refocus. To correct the photo, we'll use the ISO value, increasing it to let in more light if the image is too dark or decreasing it if the image is too bright. After every change, we'll take another test shot. Initially, with the suggested values, we might try adjusting the ISO between 100 and 1600 or 3200. If the photo is still too bright or too dark at the extremes, we'll adjust the exposure time. Increase it if the photo is too dark, or decrease it if it's too bright. Then take another test shot, and if needed, repeat the adjustment. It might seem inefficient at first, but once you've done it a few times, it becomes very quick, and you can get the right shot with the right settings in no more than 2 or 3 test photos. One last thing that seems trivial but happens often, since we're working at night, practice finding the buttons on your DSLR in the dark. If you need to use a flashlight, avoid lighting up the area where others might be photographing, and don't shine the light in anyone's eyes. Ideally, use a red flashlight, as the red light doesn't dilate our pupils like white light, almost blinding us. With these simple steps, anyone can photograph the aurora or the night sky. Before embarking on a photographic journey with the method just described, you can practice in the city by photographing a square, a lit-up building, or a pedestrian street. Night photography with an action cam. There is nothing stopping you from using an action cam for night photography. For example, if we take a GoPro 10, it already has pre-programmed the ability to take night shots, both photos and videos. The parameters we can modify are all the same as those we've seen for cameras, so we can act as explained for cameras. The resulting photographs will be of good quality, although slightly lower in quality. Night photography with smartphone. Same observation as for action cams, but we have two possible solutions. In automatic mode, without worrying about adjustments or parameters, and without worrying too much about vibrations, decent photos can be taken. In fact, smartphone photo software is very advanced. In general, this software introduces strong corrections automatically. In manual mode, the phone doesn't allow us to directly change certain parameters. However, there are applications that allow us to find on the smartphone screen the ability to adjust ISO, aperture, etc. A good program to test for those who want to simulate a camera is Procam. There are various modules, some of which are paid and others free. If you start night photography with a smartphone, you should try how it corrects vibrations. In fact, there are some smartphones that allow to take a picture, let's say of the moon or an urban view, without using a tripod. The vibration correction is very powerful and made automatically. Thanks to stay with us until the end of this video. If you liked this video, remember to subscribe to the channel to stay updated with the new contents that will be published regularly.